Hi, everyone. My name is Leire Asensio. Today, I will be together with David Ma hosting this event, the Climate Imaginary Roundtable discussion. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I am on today, the Wurundjeri, as well as the traditional owners of the land you are situated on, and acknowledge the Indigenous Australians that have been custodians of the land and waterways of Australia for thousands of years. I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Please note that this event is being recorded. This roundtable is organized for the 2021 NGV Melbourne Design Week and is associated with the Climate Imaginary online exhibition hosted by the MSD. The Climate Imaginary showcases a growing body of work from both local and international design professionals, researchers, and students that offer us captivating visions of an imaginative commitment to addressing the climate emergency. There is a growing body of work emanating from the deployment of the design imaginary that bridges the technological, political, and cultural, offering conceptions of a visionary engagement with the climate crisis. Today, we are honored to have the following guest speakers who also have their works exhibited. So we have Design Earth, Rania Goshen and El-Hadi Jazairi. Design Earth is an architectural research practice that engages architectural representation as a speculative medium for making visible and public the geographies of the climate crisis. Design Earth was founded by Rania Goshen and El-Hadi Jazairi. Both are educators. Rania is Associate Professor of Architecture and Urbanism at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and El-Hadi is Associate Professor of Architecture at the University of Michigan. Goshen and Jazairi are authors of Geographies of Trash, published in 2015, and also Use Stories and Other Architecture for the Environment, published in 2019-2020. The recent projects include commissions by the Bauhaus Museum in Dusseldorf, Venice Architecture Biennale, the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism, and the Oslo Architecture Triennale. We have Ecosistema Urbano, Belinda Tato. Belinda Tato is an architect, landscape, and urban designer. She's the co-founder and co-director of Ecosistema Urbano, a design and consulting company operating within the fields of urbanism, architecture, engineering, and sociology, with offices both in Madrid and Miami. Ecosistema Urbano defined their approach as an urban social design, the design of urban spaces with a social agenda to empower local communities. This philosophy aims to involve the citizens in the creative and transformative process of designing their own urban environments. Over 20 years, Ecosistema Urbano has worked on more than 90 projects in 30 countries for governmental entities, city municipalities, and educational and cultural institutions worldwide. Since 2010, she has been faculty at Harvard University at the Graduate School of Design in Cambridge, where she is an associate professor in practice of landscape architecture. And in 2019, she became a trustee at the Norman Foster Foundation. Fadi Massoud is an assistant professor of landscape architecture and urbanism at the University of Toronto and the director of the Center for Landscape Research. His research, teaching, and design work focuses on the relationships between environmental systems, design, and instrumental planning policy tools. Massoud currently leads research projects on climate adaptive urban and landscape design, novel resilient urban codes, and the future of metropolitan public open space. Massoud currently sits on Waterfront Toronto's design review panel and is a member of the City of Toronto's Urban Floodings Working Group. Bob Au, Jonathan Skelsa, and Jennifer Bergland are design partners of the award-winning cross-disciplinary design practice of Architecture Landscape. The office approaches design problems by exploring the oppositions established by the vantage points conventionally isolated within the two disciplines, resulting in design solutions that strive to disintegrate the subject-object relationship conventionally established between landscape and building. They are both fellows of the American Academy in Rome. Jonathan is an associate professor of architectural design and technology at Pratt Institute, and Jennifer is an assistant professor in landscape architecture at Cornell University. WOWOWA are an office based in Melbourne. They are part of a younger generation of practices that place social and environmental responsibility at the center of their practice, while still maintaining a strong investment in building a design culture. They are passionate about creating meaningful, contemporary, idea-based civic spaces, but also celebrate the kitsch and a love of daffy colloquialisms translated into architectural ambition. Monique Woodwork is the director and co-founder of WOWOWA Architecture. And in 2019, Monique was the recipient of the Australian Institute of Architects National Emerging Architect Prize and was co-creative director of the Institute's 2019 National Conference Collective Agency. Isobel Moy has been working at WOWOWA since 2017 and has contributed to many residential projects as well as educational and institutional projects. Now, may I ask Design Earth to join on the screen? Thank you.
Hey, Leire and David and Asensio, thank you for organizing both the roundtable and the exhibition. It's a pleasure to join you this evening. So we'll start with a very brief PowerPoint to introduce the film, The Elephant in the Room, that is in the exhibition and that we're sharing tonight. What sort of story is climate change? Climate is statistics over weather over an arbitrarily defined period of time. So by definition, climate is mediated, including a series of cultural forms, narratives, vocabularies, images, objects, myths. The present predicament of the climate crisis springs from the worldview of carbon modernity and its economic and representational mythology of development and endless growth. So we need to learn to tell other stories of the Earth, and design might be tasked with producing such new cognitive and affective frames that are better able to deal with and respond to the climate crisis. The work of Design Earth is built on the foundational idea that an environmentalist imagination in architecture is critical to address historical situations that are enclosed by the climate crisis, and to bring forth such renewed agency for designs in the way we imagine, care for, and act on the Earth. Our book, Geostories, Another Architecture for the Environment, explore the descriptive machine that makes visible and sensible the issues of climate change. We asked, how can we convert into image and narrative the disasters that are slow-moving and long in the making? In response, we explored how speculative narrative and its persistent engagement with technological questions in relation to the planet, including those created by broadening risk scenarios, can open up our stories to relentless diversity and urgent troubles. Maybe beyond techno fixes, the term SF, as Donna Haraway uses it for a series of acronyms: science fiction, speculative fabulation, string figures, speculative feminism, science fact, cultivates thinking about what current technologies, theories, or habits can't yet solve. So we introduced briefly the agenda for Design Earth and the way that architecture holds descriptions of the planet through, maybe I shouldn't play with this around anymore. Okay, so we introduced briefly the premises of our book, Geostories, Another Architecture for the Environment, and its reliance on methods of speculative fiction. So the book is a series of 14 such speculative tales that synthesize various forms and scales of knowledge on technological externalities, including questions of oil extraction, trash management, ocean acidification and deep sea mining, water shortage and glacial melt, and most recently questions of air pollution, space debris, asteroid mining, and a host of other socio-ecological issues. So the book is structured into 3 domains of the Earth: the terrarium, the aquarium, and the planetarium. And something happened to the climate of public discourse around climate change during the year 2018. Maybe we can call it a renewed sense of a public awareness of the climate crisis that was put forth by new political actors, youth, and social equity movement. So for us at Design Earth, this meant a further expansion of a strain of work that deployed the medium of the drawing in public space towards a more explicit and instrumental engagement in climate activism. So the first response was almost visceral. The project echoed the call for a climate emergency as voiced by Fridays for the Future demonstrators against public change. Act as if our house is on fire is a banner for such political imagination that literally put the Blue Marble Circus project, which is the cover of the book, on fire. The challenge here was that the facts on climate change are clear, and maybe what we need to do now is to allow a broader public mobilization and put more pressure on political and industrial leaders to hear and to act such stories. So they were printed on large fabrics, these two banner flags, and were part of a collective exhibition that lined up in the city center of Orléans in France, the street of Jeanne d'Arc. Jeanne d'Arc, who herself was put on a stake and burned. So crucial to this project was Donna Haraway's invite not to forget the stink in the air from the burning of witches. The second project in the same series was making climate public was called Flag the Earth, which communicated the rapidly increasing climate crisis and the rapidly decreasing carbon budget. So Flag the Earth visualizes the planet's carbon budget in a series of 3 concentric circles, the thickness of which is proportional to CO2 emissions. Those already released into the atmosphere, the allowance before the 2 degrees Celsius benchmark, and the business as usual scenario. This was designed for a climate emergency event that coincided with the global climate strike on September 20, 2019. It starts by redesigning the iconic Earth flag towards such climate emergency, raising it on the roof of Rand Hall, the architecture school at Cornell University, and in collaboration with Climate Justice Cornell, organized a march from the college to the Student Union Center and from there to downtown Ithaca. So the idea was to bring the representational and making visible and making public power of architecture into the making of such climate action. So where does this bring us into our conversation today? So this public action came at a time when we stand to imagine how we will answer to the question that philosophers are putting on our table today as educators, that we knew what we had to know and what did we do about it. Maybe we academics stand in a special position to provoke, envision, and propose an institutional responsibility and action on the part of the university. So are we able to consent to this trust, to accept giving it the power to affect us? And for Design Earth, the question is, can the space of the drawing itself be one such medium of activism? So not necessarily in making visible agenda in the drawing and in making public agenda in physical space, but can the agency of the drawing synthesize both? So you will begin to see in the animation that follows even self-referential links to these former 2 events and their symbols, starting here with kind of find the many Waldos in the imagination that are carrying these various flags. The project Elephant in the Room was first a series of 2 drawings and a text that are winners of the Reimagining Museums for Climate Change competition and will be exhibited at the Glasgow Science Centre during COP in late 2021, COP26. So that both drawings channel the viewpoint and the composition of the diorama to call into question the legacies of broadly museums of nature and in particular the American Museums of Natural History, amidst many contemporary calls now to imagine what a climate museum might be. So the 2 drawings eventually became a storyboard, and the time of the text became a longer narrative, which blows life into the alarm. The alarm is the name of the centerpiece at the American Museum of Natural History, and it's called upon to address the challenges of another alarm, that of climate emergency. So the herd of elephant charges out of the Africa hole in the museum to stomach the legacies of colonialism, sexism, and racism, all fondly outlined by Donna Haraway as the teddy bear patriarchy. The story goes full circle with Donna in rhyming verse narrating the adventures of the elephant matriarch in her environmentalist rebellion.
So thank you very much. We will move to Belinda Tato now.
Okay, thank you so much again, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to listen to all of you. It was beautiful, the piece that we just listened and watched. So my name is Belinda Tato. I'm going to be presenting some of the work of Ecosistema Urbano. So I started the practice together with my partner 20 years ago, and we had the opportunity to work in different parts of the world, being exposed to different cultures, different climates, and different ways of understanding public space. Our work has been kind of operating between these 3 pillars. So the first one is the environmental. How can we bring climatic comfort to public space? How can we enhance urban ecosystems and how can we make cities more resilient. The second one is the social. How can we make our work to be educational and engaging? And also how can our work and landscape architecture contribute to promote equity around the city? And then the third component has been technology. So we've been kind of designing interactive interfaces in public space. We have introduced innovation in public space, and we also like to think that we're designing open processes that we don't have full control of, and that's the whole point, to design kind of public space as an infrastructure for people to reimagine their lives and their cities. So I'm going to be presenting different projects that have been tackling or addressing the climatic comfort as a kind of a basic requirement for being able to have a social life. So the first one is in Madrid. This is a kind of our oldest project regarding climate comfort, and it was an infrastructure to be placed in this kind of very uninteresting new environment that was being produced in the outskirts of Madrid. So this kind of planning was very much about public space around the use of the car and the speed of the car. So the proposal was not only about multiplying by 3 the number of original trees, but also about creating these infrastructures that meant to produce this climatic comfort in the public space, especially addressing the summer, because the summer is very, very hot and people kind of, get confined throughout the whole day, and they're really kind of looking forward to come to the outside, especially in the evenings. So this is the appearance of this structure. So we built 3 of them, and we were introducing not only low-tech solutions in order to guarantee the maintenance over a long period of time, but also natural species. So it's a combination of low-tech together with nature to provide this climatic comfort. And this is how the space has been kind of tested and used and conquered for many different purposes along these years. This is a second version of the same project. This is in a completely different context. This is in Shanghai 2010, the international exhibition. So the whole expo space was very uncomfortable in terms of climatic comfort, because it's very, very humid and very, very hot in the summer nights and in the summer days. And it was interesting because the motto of the exhibition was better cities, better lives, but still the planning on the whole setting, it was not considering the climatic comfort at all. So you could see people queuing for, trying to enter the pavilions. And again, our proposal was to produce some kind of climatically designed public space for people to gather there, for people to rest, for people to have lunch, or for people to just wait to be able to, in a cool environment. So we were working with the engineerings, running different scenarios of how to work with very low tech, very simple elements such as a fan, such as awnings that were being operated and connected to the climatic sensor. So depending on the real-time conditions, this kind of infrastructure will be kind of responding to. So this is the pavilion and how it would be kind of, again, changing features for the different programs and the different climatic conditions. And we place a 7-meter diameter fan on top of a telescopic axis, so that it will come closer to the ground or farther up, depending on the conditions and the amount of people in the space. This is a completely different environment. Again, this is West Palm Beach in Florida. This is the waterfront, and this was a competition that was run in 2017. So as you can see, the waterfront is not very comfortable either, so there's not that much shade. But it was also very shocking to understand how the culture is also around climate very different in different places. So for instance, in this part of the world, there is a very, very strong culture around air conditioning, and people really literally abandon public space most of the year, or at least half of the year. And I come from a different culture in which we utilize public space a lot, even in the very, very hot summers. So it was very shocking to see that actually public space is empty. And at the same time, there is these challenges that are connected to the climate change and the sea level rise. So, although although this city is kind of protected by Palm Beach, is already and also exposed to climatic events. So the whole proposal was about creating this kind of buffer area buffer area through these canopies, which were climatic to accommodate different programs to make the downtown not only more comfortable, but also more accessible to the people who live in other neighborhoods and they don't have this kind of amenities or public space or different programs. So we were kind of designing these, again, canopies, incorporating different systems, using natural elements, but also low-tech elements to provide these different scenarios for running different programs. So this is one of the images in which we were embedding a swimming pool in the public space as a way of, again, making amenities accessible to everyone. And this was also kind of the buffer space and the canopies between the bay and the city, which was not very interactive with the water. And these are the different solutions, assuming that, again, this is a very kind of critical area in the years to come. So how could we embed different solutions for the different kind of conditions? Another component of the competition was this building, which was an existing garage building from the 70s. And the idea was to also kind of enable to have different climatic scenarios. So not all the building will be operated under air conditioning, so only certain programs. And as you can see, there was also this kind of publicness throughout the building. So you can see the red path is a street that actually goes all across the building, all the way to the rooftop. So there was different climatic strategies from the green courtyard to operating, also understanding how the climate works and how we could, make it efficient both during the night to cool it down, but also during the day. And also, generating these facades that were creating this kind of buffer spacing and understanding that the building can operate 360 days a year, and it has different requirements in terms of programming, in terms of users, stakeholders, but allowing also this kind of different climatic performances at different times of the day and the seasons. This is a small project for the city of Valencia in front of the IVAM, which is an institution around culture. And the idea was to recreate the Mediterranean forest in front of it, and as an educational proposal, working with both the climatic conditions, but also, again, embedding the educational portion of it. And then the last project that I want to introduce is a project that is under construction right now. It's a boulevard for the University of Malaga, which is a city in the south of Spain. It's also a city that can be very comfortable almost the whole year, and is the public space for the university. And it is interesting this was a kind of a pre-COVID proposal, but the whole point was to actually bring out of the indoor space, out of the buildings, some of the academic activity that can really take advantage of the beautiful weather that takes place the whole year, and trying to create a public space that is more intense, more interesting, and a kind of a connection point between the academic activity, but also the general public and the citizens from the city. So there was a number of devices and systems to, again, accommodate the climatic conditions, but also kind of customize some other features such as lighting and technology to enable this kind of outdoor classrooms operate throughout the year. So I'm going to be playing a video about the project.
Imagine an open university that integrates into urban life. Interactive public spaces that promote conversations between disciplines. Technologies and digital interfaces that boost knowledge sharing. In a natural, bioclimatically conditioned environment. Creating connected spaces that enhance exchange between students, teachers, and visitors. The main boulevard at the Universidad de Málaga connects existing facilities and opens up the campus to the public, creating a pedestrian walkway activated by hubs or public squares with learning and leisure spaces, incorporating technology to create an interactive urban environment connected to the digital world, an ecological corridor that efficiently manages resources, creating diverse natural landscapes. Pedestrian walkways protected by natural buffers become the perfect setting for meeting up, resting, and relaxing. Through a digital application, users can interact with the surrounding environment and access an augmented reality with academic and cultural content. The Climatic and Digital Hub integrates collaborative learning spaces, allows the interactive modification of environmental conditions, and generates all of the park's energy. The Hub's canopy hosts technological systems that connect users to the physical space and the digital environment. Along the boulevard, open classrooms are equipped to extend the university experience to public spaces. An extensive network of sensors generate open data that enables climatic research and allows real-time identification of the most comfortable zones of the boulevard. The tranquil Olive Grove's open library encourages reading and resting while promoting and protecting biodiversity. A connected, open, interactive, and green campus. An intelligent natural space with positive energy balance and bioclimatic comfort. A positive space where collaboration, creativity, and learning define the urban scene.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Melinda, and that we move to Fadi Masood now. Thank
you. Good evening, afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I first wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, it's the meeting place and home. It's still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As Leire mentioned, my name is Fadi Masood, and I'm Assistant Professor of Landscape Architecture at the University of Toronto. Today, about half of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of an estuary, where 8 out of the 10 largest metropolitan regions are currently situated. That is roughly 5 billion people that live at the point where the ground is neither wet nor dry, but has always been and will be in a state of constant flux, or a terra sorta firma, as I like to call it. In order to live on and in these landscapes, these settlements need to first slow and absorb water to prevent flooding rather than dispose of it as fast as possible. Its infrastructure must retain, purify, and improve the quality of that water, and in that process create net positive ecosystem services, while also activating the social public realm through the coupling of civic, economic, and performative uses. So what went wrong? Knowing that we've mastered living in these contexts for millennia, why are cities today increasingly challenged to adapt to climate change? The first reason is that between 1950 and 2020, urbanization patterns have shifted dramatically. The rate of urban growth is unprecedented, where it's estimated that another 2.5 billion people will urbanize estuaries by 2050. The second reason, is that we've paved our world. This is a map that shows where there's at least 10% of the surface area is impervious. And because of urbanization...
Fadi, we can't see the screen, sorry.
No problem, sorry about that. All right, so as I was mentioning, the second reason why we're having so much trouble adapting our coastal cities is that we've paved our world. This is a map that shows where at least 10% of the surface area is impervious. And because of of rapid urbanization, our estuaries are now compromised in their natural ability to clean water, produce biodiversity, and control flooding. The ground is one of those first places of intervention that is often overlooked in the design process, and it's important that we understand our agency as designers in shaping terrain and topography in an era of climate change. For centuries, we've been shaping and engineering artificial terrains through land reclamation. But in a time where coastlines, associated activities, and abutting settlements are especially vulnerable to climate change, the process of coastal land reclamation for urban development has become a precarious challenge. To many surprise, sand is the most consumed natural resource on the planet after freshwater. And as sand that is weathered by water and is flatter is compatible for development in concrete, while the abundant desert sand is round and weathered by wind is largely useless. 40 billion tons of sand a year goes into urban development. That's twice the amount of sediment carried by all the world's rivers combined. And seemingly infinite has now become a scarce resource. China alone consumed more sand in 3 years than the US has in the last 100. Think of all the bridges, dams, ports, airports, and buildings combined. And it's becoming such an issue that the United Nations released in 2019 a Sand and Sustainability Report for Environmental Governance. So I've been working in my lab into kind of beginning to diagram and understand this process of land reclamation so that we may intervene in this process. And to document the role of different global conglomerates, they're mostly Dutch and Chinese, that are associated, and their associate technologies that are responsible for shaping and reshaping so much of our Earth. Globally, the success of projects on reclaimed land has proven to be variable. Acres of undeveloped plots. And nowhere is this more evident than in China. China reclaimed 13,000 square kilometers of land and expanded its coastline by almost 2,000 kilometers in the last 40 years. This resulted in a reduction of 50% of China's coastal plains and wetlands that we know are critical areas for biodiversity and shoreline defense. This practice continues today, where new artificial terrain is being constructed at a rate of 700 square kilometers per year. This is footage you're seeing right here of the Tianjin area around the Bohai Bay just south of Beijing. So we began to analyze these areas of coastal reclamation in China using a series of matrices and indices to assess the condition and viability of these projects. Note at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, Manhattan, as a scale comparison and as a reference for the scale of these reclamation projects. We then expanded this analysis to encompass global case studies that range in age, size, and scope. To better understand this global paradox facing coastal cities, where waterfront land continues to be prime real estate, but it's also the most vulnerable to flooding. As reclamation technology advances, we now have new methods to assess real-time risk when building and shaping these new terrains, such as liquefaction, erosion, and flooding. So by using things like generative design, we can now deploy new techniques that optimize cut and fill operations. And they can also be responsive to live feed data, such as currents, tides, salinity, versus the static binary construction method of land reclamation, to create new landforms and coastal land techniques that are optimized to respond to things like flood risk, land value, habitat creation, and access to infrastructure. They are imagined as new coastal terrains that are responsive to gradients of inundation and water fluctuations. And based on these generative terrains, we then can associate appropriate building types, open spaces, and infrastructure provisions. And here you kind of start to see this novel type of urban transect that dissolves the wet and dry binary that we're so typically used to, and offers an expanded type of urban code or urban menu of permitted uses and building types along a littoral gradient, one that embraces and is shaped by degrees of uncertainty. And you can find all this work in this recently published book by Akhtar with the same title. Lastly, designers need to imagine new ways of institutionalizing resilient design through hyper-localized, novel, and nuanced codes. The tools of rational planning that's armed with judicial powers has been shaping normative planning practice for a really long time now. And some of these codes, such as the land-based classification standards, remain the most powerful and ubiquitous. These planometric and projective representation of our cities are extremely powerful because they're in fact a piece of legislative law where there's almost a direct relationship between what is drawn and what is built, even in places as complex and as dynamic as these Floridian swamps. And Florida is this really fascinating case study to study a lot of these issues. For example, on the left-hand side here, you see the current land use zoning map for the Hollywood area of Broward County. And Broward County is the first county just north of Miami in South Florida. And on the right, you see the same zoning map with 2 feet and 6 feet of projected flood sea level rise on top of that same land use zoning map. And you would think it's a little weird that a projective zoning ordinance map and a future flood projection map wouldn't have been thought of congruently. The truth is there's very little ability in existing administrative tools to accommodate dynamic environmental systems and indeterminacy in shaping the future fabric of our cities. So in collaboration with MIT's Urban Risk Lab, the University of Toronto Center for Landscape Research has been working on developing this platform that allows residents and officials in places like South Florida to better understand the relationships between built form, urban codes, and their underlying environmental conditions in real time. So using digital descriptions of ecomorphological attributes such as soil type, soil permeability, base flood elevation, seasonal water table height, and storm surge, we're utilizing algorithms to begin to classify and create distinct environmental risk profiles. The result is a series of discrete zones that can form more targeted interventions and direct future built form and zoning codes. Here you see the difference in land use categorization this process produces. So on the left is the approved 2060 Broward County land use zoning map, and on the right is our proposed new clustering method that takes into account environmental conditions and risk. And from that, we can get a series of associated clusters and land uses and densities that are much more reflective of the environmental conditions and uncertainty that underlies them. And we're working into zooming in further into specific neighborhoods and parcels so we can imagine what is the appropriate water storage potential, lot coverage, building, and building heights and age and values. So as water levels begin to fluctuate, urban clusters may begin to serve different functions. They generate more responsive urban scenarios that are linked to more calibrated parameters and projections. So we can start to go from an area that is zoned for one possible future outcome to one that generates a set of more responsive scenario-driven urban proposals. Lastly, I want to share with you this drawing that I've been working on with my RAs at the Center for Landscape Research, where we've compiled over 60 resilience and adaptation design strategies and put them on a prototypical estuary cross-section. This drawing is about 12 feet long. And it includes strategies that are infrastructural, typological, and spatial at different scales. And we kind of, again, took this transect that goes from the ocean to a high ground where built density is concentrated and is integrated into more responsive landscape systems and infrastructures that function in more symbiotic ways with their surrounding environment. And then the section extends out into the suburban fabric, where the functioning of programs such as logistics, agriculture, and conservation also warrant new design moves. The ultimate goal is to highlight the need for urban forms to integrate with their landscape as the primary driver for resilient urbanism. I will end by quoting landscape lawyer J.B. Jackson, who astonishingly spoke about climate change to an audience of urbanists and designers almost 50 years ago. He wisely observed, and I quote, that the beaches along the Gulf and the Atlantic are doomed to destruction. They are remorselessly eaten away by the sea, he tells us. Geographers tell us that we're being driven inward by the rising ocean at a rate of 1 vertical foot a century. When asked about the future trajectory of the design professions in a changing environment, he responded, "These are some of my reasons for believing that the natural environment cannot be saved in its present form. It can be summed up by saying that everything conspires against the permanent form for the natural world around us. And so we need to embrace change and uncertainty by designing for it." At the end, it's important to remember that in an age of extreme uncertainty brought upon by the climate crisis, we should first break down our professional silos, question the binaries of wet and dry, land and water, and dissolve them into design gradients that respond to more uncertain futures. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fadi. We have Jennifer and Jonathan now. Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
Thanks very much for having us. Leire and David, the exhibition is fantastic, and it's really great to see pulling together all of this work into one place. Anyway, hi, my name is Jonathan Shelsa, and I'm an associate professor of architecture at Pratt Institute.
And I'm Jennifer Berkland. I'm an assistant professor at Cornell. Our collaborative research practice, Barkland, is located in Brooklyn, New York. And over the past several years, we've been investigating the relationship between the contemporary dense city and regional infrastructural systems displaced as part of the modern practice of urbanization. We've examined projects concerning waste, water, energy infrastructure, and speculative remixing of hinterland and cultural urban form.
For the Climate Imaginary exhibit, we examine the relationships between vertical urban high-density architecture and the intensive and industrial processes of hinterland agriculture. The project is entitled New Agronon, a domestic reverie on agricultural living. The project was assembled with a team from our office and a few really industrious research assistants at the Pratt Institute.
So we're going to tell you a bit of a story for New Agronon. Their elevator was out. The trash chute was blocked and the freezer was starting to smell. Adam and Eve purchased their condo on the 63rd floor of New York's shiniest new pencil tower atop along Billionaires Row in early March of 2020. Months later, and the initial excitement of the sweeping views of the curated nature of Olmsted Park had kind of settled down, and they were replaced with the repeated frustration over the loud bangings heard in the walls, the trash chute noises echoing in their bathroom, and the constant outages with their private elevator. With their fresh direct order orphaned at the bottom of the tower, Adam's stomach groaned, and he asked Eve the question, how many others in the city are experiencing the same infrastructural nightmare? As Adam swiped through the articles about their newest investment, both of their minds drifted into their collective predicament.
Adam recalls that he and Eve were among the 500 fortunate individuals who speculatively invested in these new plots of land in the heavens. Their new home, like others on Billionaires Row, exemplified the apotheosis of center-periphery land value systems established in the 20th century. This new gleaming beacon of verticalism supports 725,000 square feet of living, delicately positioned on less than half an acre of terrestrial ground in the center of New York. These pencils measure a density ratio of upwards to 50 FAR.
Meanwhile, Eve flips through the pages of her book, and her mind escapes to the value system that Adam is complaining about and focuses on the carbon footprint of their recent turn towards delivered food. Currently, 83% of our food is produced domestically, with 17% being imported. The country currently utilizes 1,000 million acres of farmland and rangeland to support this agricultural infrastructure. Climate change is proving to be a yearly issue that challenges these farmers as well as the environment. As she gazes out towards the horizon, she meditates on the relationship between growing carbon emissions and the logistical shipping networks that connect New York to its regional and global hinterlands of production. She wonders to herself, how much space does this really all need?
A quick Google search tells Eve that the 2006 United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization reported that each person individually, internationally, requires a half acre of arable land to support life. This startling amount of unseen infrastructure prompts Eve to break out her calculator. Hey Adam, Eve proclaims, did you realize that the average super tall on Billionaires Row requires 270 arable acres somewhere out there as she gestures out towards the horizon? Suddenly, the 43.4 FAR seems like it really should be 660 agricultural AR. That's the equivalent of 13 additional towers just to feed us and all of our neighbors, or, as she pauses to do some more furious calculations, or if we stacked all the land on the roof, it would create a super, super tall, 18,000 feet high, to which Adam angrily replies, well, it has to go somewhere, Eve, and we pay good money. These systems are supposed to work, and he storms off to place another call to the building super.
Following Adam's tirade, Eve begins to dream of an alternative super tall paradigm that values proximity to agricultural production in lieu of externalization. The new policy Eve envisions requires the upzone mid-Manhattan lots to each house their own agricultural area locally within the zoning envelope and within the inhabitants responsible for its growth. Perhaps Eve's imaginary skyscraper resembles more of a commune than a microcity, a place of collective reliance immersed within the urban grid as a micro-arcology that providing for itself and perhaps for the imminent district beyond. Immediate, excuse me. Eve, lost in her thoughts, begins to think about all of the different types of produce she consumes on a regular basis. Fruits, vegetables, grains, meats. These remind her of the food pyramid she was taught in elementary school. A balanced diet means a balanced life, but how did other countries develop their own food pyramids? Not every continent has access to the same resources, and each culture obviously has its own culinary needs. A globalized city would need variance and differentiation between food towers, each plugging into the ground of a unified city grid. As Eve stares out her 12-foot square window, she imagines a new tower growing upwards between the developer-driven architecture of Billionaires Row, New Agrenon.
While its pier pencil towers house 500 people on half-acre lots, as supported by the carbon infrastructure, Eve envisions New Agrenon taking the form of the food pyramid as a way to organize production into a series of substructural towers along its very core. For the tower's form, Eve mined the memories of her childhood amongst Iowan cornfields, wrapping these in a helix around the core as suspended above a market where the tower's stewards sell their excess goods. Her mind dodged in and out of the palm fruit trees, sculpturally espaliered into a stagger-stacked truss orchard, populated with apiary totem poles for local pollination. She rolled the pastures of Nebraska into a single surface, structurally offset from an outrigger of dairy milking stations. She became lost in an endless library of wheat, grown vertically in trays within an exoskeletal shell, serviced by window washer units from above. Eve bundled tubes of enfiladed hydroponic rooms to the vertical core, each with ornately piped doors of lettuce and leafy grass. She basked in a taproot fishery with aquaponic farms, hanging nets and trays of shrimp hatcheries cantilevering from its watery core. Housing the root bulbs of the palm trees, she envisioned a tropical interstice that dropped the sugary dates and bananas to sweeten her daily smoothies. Finally, Eve spelunked the cave-like interiors of a sheer wall-clad fungi chapel, harvesting the mushrooms within for her daily favorite omelet. Crowning the tower, Eve creates a mechanical spire of water infrastructure in her mind, telegraphing to all near and far the requisites of water and mechanical infrastructure for the agricultural fantasy.
Eve's vision provokes the notion that a world in search of solutions to a climate crisis must develop new paradigms of urbanism that privilege more sustainable means of production over displaced value systems. But of course, despite its ambitions for a world of change, this project stands as a second type of infrastructural absurdity.
Yet while it may seem obvious to dismiss this urban reverie due to its misuse of the world's most highly valued land area for the deployment of civilization's cheapest land use, the absurdity of the commune of New Agrenon serves as a mirror for the nightmare that is the rotting imported lychee sitting in the icebox of the 63rd floor apartment on Billionaires Row. Perhaps we should keep dreaming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have Monique and Isobel now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're obviously very humbled to be part of this incredible discussion. I'll just intro myself. I'm Monique Woodward. This is Isabel Moy. We started in 2010. We have a office of 12 people in Collingwood in Melbourne. We're an emerging practice, and yeah, we do a lot of really yummy residential work, but we do community and civic facilities as well as community schools. One of the things we're most proud of is our B Corp certification. So it actually takes our business one step further than Architects Declare, in that we're legally required to meet the benchmarks of a global network of businesses that meet the highest standards of social and environmental sustainability. And so we've joined businesses like Patagonia, The Guardian, Etsy, Keep Cup, for example. And yeah, I guess where we use our yummy renovations to pay for our speculative projects that are really centered around the agency that we have as architects to create a regenerative economy and environment with a deep respect to country as well. So this is one of those projects. It's called A New Normal. We'll put the link in to the chat soon, but it's for Melbourne Design Week. The website is normalize.it. It's essentially seeking, it's with 15 other architects, essentially seeking 100 bill in the next 10 years to create a regenerative city. Basically, the countries are too politicized that cities can make change. This is Yarra Pools. I'm on the board of Yarra Pools that is basically has the aim of making the beautiful waterway that runs through our city swimmable. So, but this is the project that we're here to present today. It's it was a master plan that we won at a competition phase for emerging architects. We won it quite a few years ago, but it was for the revitalisation and I guess reimagining of the underground car park at Melbourne Uni. Isabel worked on this project, and so she's going to present the actual scheme itself.
So, like Mon said, in 2018, Villoria was selected to undertake a master plan to reimagine the future of the South Lawn car park at Melbourne University. Our vision for the Melbourne University South Lawn car park was to evolve a unique, underutilised space on campus into a vibrant, multidiscipline living laboratory. Villoria set out to transform the car park into a mixing chamber, creating engaging and collaborative student environments and fostering on-campus community in the bones of a significant heritage building. Constructed in 1972, the underground car park was a bold architectural gesture that transformed the identity of the campus. For the time, the car park was an effective solution for isolating cars on campus to one designated area of the university, and therefore improved pedestrian movement and access around the rest of the campus. At the time of its construction, no other car park in Australia was fully enclosed and concealed underneath the landscape. So it was therefore one of Australia's first and largest green roofs. The structure was an innovative and imaginative solution to the mundane and utilitarian problem of car parking, which actually offered back something socially and culturally crucial to the campus, which was the South Lawn. In 2017, the decision was made to close the South Lawn underground car park to fully pedestrianise the campus. No longer required to house vehicles, the design challenge for the master plan was how to unlock the potential of this large central site on campus that is hidden beneath 7,500 square metres of South Lawn. Villoria's proposal capitalises on the car park's opportunity to become the university's cultural hub and meeting place, shifting the car park from concealed to revealed and exposing the edges and expressing the car park structure as a dynamic brutalist roof. By opening up the edges, the car park becomes an accessible and open space. The addition of the lift to the north makes the car park accessible to all. Essentially, the car park becomes this new front of house, inverting the South Lawn thoroughfare from up and over to down and through, creating connections across campus, increasing campus porosity and campus amenity. Part of the master plan's aim was to respond to an increasing need for robust working and collaborative spaces on campus. It was about designing welcoming space for cross-disciplinary conversation, collaboration, and experimentation. The bones of the car park could serve as a robust, brutalist backdrop for new ideas, creating a space to foster collective interest in new and emerging technologies. In this space, applied technologies could thrive, allowing for student-driven agency and initiatives. Creative research outputs are exhibited and celebrated in a lively, adaptive reuse of space. One of the main hurdles for the project was that the car park was designed to house vehicles, not people. It was never designed to be heated, cooled, or properly illuminated, all the things required for a comfortable working environment. The solution was to use self-sufficient pods, with services running beneath the asphalt of the car park to provide light, data, temperature control, and power outlets. These would be formal or informal workspaces, designed in a way that allows students and teachers to showcase the variety of work going on around the university in real time. The images we created for the master plan were only the initial concept, but began to highlight the vision for the guts of the car park as a lightweight kit of parts. These mobile insertions and pods could weave around the existing heritage structure, providing adaptable working environments and event spaces that could be reconfigured to suit a variety of situations. So what is the future of the car? And therefore, what is the future of the car park? There's a lot of speculation about the role of the car in our cities and how we adapt the infrastructure that accommodates it. The closure of Melbourne University's underground car park and the vision for its adaptive reuse could be seen as a smaller scale test case for the removal or the reduction of cars in our cities. Within the conversation of the climate emergency, this project highlights the importance of being able to design with the existing, to repurpose what we already have, to make our cities more sustainable and in turn more human-centered. It's important for everyone, not just designers and architects, to see the value and the potential of the obsolete. Car parks, industrial buildings, and the like are not an obstacle in our cities, but instead a foundation for continued action. Thanks.
And we're really excited to present this project because I guess we're still really hoping that we'll win. I mean, that we'll get it built. So it's, yeah, I guess COVID put a stop to it, but we'd already started doing quite a few different, you know, staged works and designed for end-of-trip facilities and things like that. So I have full faith that it will, at one stage, be realised, but I think it'll be a very slow burn. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for really inspiring presentations. I mean, it was great to...
Yeah, we'll just like to invite everybody to come, I guess, to the roundtable now, and we can actually kickstart a bit of a general conversation. So maybe just as a way to, as an icebreaker, we can actually start the first question. So one of the motivations that we had for the exhibition was actually to offer a slice through a kind of a wider spectrum of approaches that you know, we see from the design world with engaging the climate emergency. You know, I think now that we've actually showcased, I think that this presentation also showcases that wide spectrum as well. There's quite a wide series of, I guess, motivations, methods, and approaches to kind of engage with the climate emergency. Maybe now is not a bad time for us to consider, you know, to reflect on what is shared and also what differentiates the different approaches that we have, the way that we engage with the climate imaginary, I guess. We'll leave that open to you guys.
Yes, and in the meantime, if the audience has, if any of you have questions, please post them in the Q&A.
Maybe if you could speak to how you approach the issue of the climate emergency and how you mobilize, you know, the idea of the design imaginary to kind of create a response to it somehow. We're making the argument that in many ways the design world had engaged with the climate issues, but it's always been seen within the kind of spectrum of problem solving. But in many ways, I think your works they're not just problem solving exercises. They actually they connect technological, political, and cultural issues. And we're just wondering what are your approaches to it?
I can jump in.
Sure.
Yeah, I am part of a research group right now who is actually working in Asia and the extreme heat that is going to be happening in the next, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years. And it's been a very interesting, you know, kind of experience. It's been an interesting experience for me because it's very clear that scientists do have numbers already, and they already have the numbers of the people who are going to be dying because of extreme heat in the next decades. And somehow it's always, you know, as every other aspect on Earth, is always the most vulnerable, who are the most vulnerable in terms of economy, in terms of income, in terms of health, the ones that are going to be more affected, and they're going to be kind of, you know, migrating to other areas of the world. And so it's very interesting because, you know, of course, you know, and I guess, you know, I kind of connect with everybody in the roundtable today. We're all designers, and for me the challenge is like, okay, we already know that those are the facts. You know, there's numbers, there's figures, there is facts that this is going to be happening. But the question is, how can we translate those into something that is kind of manageable and doable in the short term to actually prevent this kind of events to happen in the future. So I very much enjoy the presentations, and I think what I'm trying to say is, like, we do have an amazing and a very important role to actually kind of prevent these issues or improve the living conditions of everyone in the next coming years, because there's so much that's going to be happening, and there is a need to, you know, to really kind of, you know, make this percolate into everyday practice and every, you know, no matter if it is sea level rise or extreme heat or, you know, architecture, landscape, urban planning, you know, all these layers are affected by the climate change. And I don't know, just so, you know, I really appreciate, you know, the curator effort that you made in bringing all these different practices. And I really think, again, that we have an amazing role and a huge responsibility, but also an opportunity to innovate and you know, put in place good practices that also kind of inspire others to, yeah, to do the same.
I can maybe
I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, maybe I can piggyback on that too, because I mean, I think we're all, as designers, in the business of imagining the future somehow, and we have to for better or worse, be inherently optimistic, you know? So I think if on the one hand, there's the kind of doom and gloom of, you know, the impending crisis that we're all aware of, but our job is literally to imagine the future somehow and operationalize it. So optimism has to be somehow, somewhere, even at the most naive level, be there. And whether that be, you know, from my experience working in South Florida, you know, they're always inundated with images of their towns flooded, and rarely are they ever inundated with images that show their homes and towns in a kind of condition that has been adapted to the future. And so I would say the link between the climate crisis and the design possibilities or agencies to actually offer, in one way or another, through visualization, through drawing, through narrative, a picture of the future in which, even as they adapt or places change, that we are offering some glimmer of optimism of what is possible through design. So I feel, you know, I feel that that's one thing that we bring on the table that, let's say, climate scientists might not be able to do, or civil engineers might not necessarily talk about, or even politicians. You know, we are literally in the business of drawing and imagining the future. And so optimism has to be somewhere, somehow embedded in it.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and just say that, I mean, we couldn't agree more. The link that I put in the chat was for Normalize It for New Normal, which is essentially a crazy scientist with a financial background has got together 15 Melbourne architects, and through Melbourne Design Week has, you know, brought together, I guess, financial modelling and you know, 15 different like solar panels, and, you know, I mean, anaerobic digesters that Wawa has been engaging with are more, I guess, a bit more high tech, but actually, you know, shit water. Basically, there's like misters at this exhibition, you know, using black water. I mean, those are initiatives that are all over the world. So we're just bringing them all together into one city. And that's the power of design, because it becomes this beautiful exhibition and people can go there. And last week we had Development Victoria there, Sustainability Victoria was there, like all of these key players. The mayor opened it. We were having a round table with basically every single, you know, Melbourne developer tomorrow. So I think it's the power of design and the power to bring us together in something tangible and sort of say, we need $50 million to do all of these little projects that, you know, that's base camp. 100 bill is, you know, Everest, but like, you know, we need to sort of start to work towards that. And I think as designers, we have this amazing capacity to visualize the future. And I think that allows emotional buy-in that, that other professionals don't have.
I'd like to
Maybe I'll just, yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So maybe I'll just add to that a couple of things. Maybe one on the responsibility of imagining a future where the structure of unevenness that have brought us to the now are themselves radically changed. So we don't just change kind of the icing on the cake, but that the crisis, as all crisis, is a moment to rethink what should be prioritized in making the cake. And I think that's partially the call for elephant in the room. It's a call for, similarly to the work we've done on landscapes of energy and other technological systems earlier, it's for the transition to the green, not to perpetuate myths that were similar in the making of, say, earlier energy transitions. When fossil fuels were first around, most of the kind of advertisement in the mid-20th century was praising oil from Aladdin's lamp, promising us kind of the land of endless growth and the many wonders that oil would bring. And I think it took us a few years decades through the denial of fossil fuel corporations of their active involvement in the destruction of the climate. So I think part of the work now is to draw a future that does not lead us into kind of familiar tropes, a challenging task, I think. The other is to kind of point also to the unevenness of the field within which we operate. I mean, maybe some of the memes that were circulating around the major container ship being stuck in the Suez Canal were some that used it to index the unevenness between the 100 companies that are emitting 70% of greenhouse gases, and then the efforts and kind of the small dredging operations of the individual switch the light off mechanism. Not to belittle the individual efforts, but to also point to the uneven role that the current destruction is occurring within, and starting from within the institutions that we operate. And maybe this was at the time when thinking as a citizen, as a political citizen in the United States was not kind of a attraction that could go very far. So the second institutional affiliation maybe, or citizenship, was that of the university. And a kind of a request to these universities that operate for a vision for a better future, for their investments not to be anymore in business operations that are primarily destroying that future. So I think that's almost on the level of what do we as citizen designers also can bring to this conversation.
Yeah, there is something I think that is quite important to mention, is that is the level of emergency, the level of urgency of the question. So for us, it's not, the question is not about representation or making visible. The question is about mobilizing towards action, towards change, towards transformation. So the audience for us is not only the sort of designer audience or sort of architecture related world, it's much beyond. So how can we use the power of representation to trigger, through figuration, through storytelling, change, and maybe understanding that we are a cluster of stories ourselves, and that we can tell stories that can change these lines and these boundaries, and maybe some of these stories will really motivate people to act and to take a role into this transformation. I think also as a discipline, we don't want to look at things changing. We want to really be part of the change and drive the change, so that when we will enter a new world, a divested world, the world that has, that is following new values, new set of values, we will be at the forefront. We will be claiming, some part of this change.
I agree with a lot of what was just said. And I guess the only thing I wanted to add on top of it to kind of top off the question was, I think imagination, at least for us, definitely for myself, stems from curiosity, and perhaps kind of curiosity of what might the next phase of our existence look like. And I think one of the challenges that we witnessed in the past decades, or perhaps the first, certainly when I was in early architectural education, was a paradigm which was to kind of deal with the climate by trying to make architecture look the way it did, in the form of kind of replication of the modernist paradigm in a way that, how do we keep making that system work and then keep making that more efficient? And in some ways, one of the failures, I would argue, of that paradigm, not even so much in its, what we're witnessing now, and that we're seeing that it was not instrumentalized, or it was not able to be instrumentalized. It was unable to capture the imagination of a new visual aesthetic that could be encultured into a population. So in some ways, I think as architects, as designers, it is as much for us to kind of set forth a new representational and ideological regime that starts to captivate the imagination of others outside of us in the process of our imagining the new world.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways the panel and the work of the panel reflects the range. So I think there's, on one hand, there's this idea that, obviously the working off the Herbert Simon idea that we don't, as designers, simply reflect reality, but we're supposed to be designing how things ought to be. So that sense of positive, positive attitude towards what we can actually bring to the table. But I think also at the other hand, I think the work of Design Earth and also Lydia Kali-Politi, who is also part of the show, uses the capacity for us to make images to actually bring to light or make explicit some of the things that are underlying the way that conventions work now, so we can actually reflect, like they say, on what we take forward with us in acting on climate change. I think we have maybe not that many minutes left, so there are a couple of questions from the audience. So we have one. Okay, so we have one that's direct. Let me just see, to everybody. So we'll start with one for everybody. Do we accept climate change and adapt to climate change? As in, is it more a process of adaptation, or do we accept that the reduction of CO2 emissions will succeed and design retain on the present status quo? Anybody want to take that one?
I mean, one of the things that I think I wanted to respond to with this that I thought was really interesting in the early pandemic, when the reports were saying, oh, the CO2 emissions are down, oh, everything is shut down, oh, but, and there was that celebration of like the earth is healing, and there were the fake images of like dolphins swimming in Venice and people were freaking out. I think that we learned through that like, just stopping everything isn't the way forward. And so I think it really, in the sort of exploration of our own project and the questions of sort of how we deal with global agriculture, like we cannot continue to sort of deal with farming practices in the United States or around the world in the way in which we've been dealing with it. It's just sort of monumentalizing and stacking on top of each other in ways that continue to just destroy our planet. So I don't think we necessarily accept, but I think that we really need to be putting people in place who ask those serious questions and figure out new ways of addressing these problems and listen to designers and specialists and scientists who actually understand our sort of visions of ways of moving forward. So I don't want to accept it, but I also don't know how to fix it by myself.
Sorry, a few more questions coming. David, maybe you.
Okay, so there's one actually directed specifically at Fadi. So do you think with research we may be able to utilize desert sand for more uses, or should we be looking at ways to build without sand?
So I would say that we must first radically and massively reduce our reliance on concrete in building. So that's where the majority of the aggregate actually goes to. That's actually the gist of it. So this is where I would say architectural, imagination would help us reduce the reliance on this sand. Actually, funny enough, Australia ships sand to the UAE to build all these palm irons. So there's a huge trade industry actually, and it's a matter of national security in some places. So Singapore, because it's so heavily reliant on sand to increase its territory, islands appear and disappear from Cambodia and Malaysia and nearby countries where they would literally be mobilized to move. So, it's not so much the resource, obviously, just like water circulates the earth, it doesn't disappear. It just gets consumed in either the terrain or in the buildings that we do. So, we don't need to invent new technologies to increase our reliance on Earth's resources. We just need to build differently and recognize that the embedded energy, just like carbon, just like water, is all still circulating on the planet. And we just gotta move away from, normative and typical processes that are so consumptive and extractive, and start to be more generative, start to use more generative techniques that just capitalizes on what's already there and recycle it. So even if we can change desert sand, I am not going to advocate for it.
Maybe we can just take one last question from the audience. I mean, it will be great to have more time to discuss with you, but this is a question from Bernadette George, urban planner from Mildura. So my question, you can read the intro, but I'll go directly to the questions. It says, my question is, are we getting much interest from inspirational developers who want to leave a better legacy from their projects? And also, what examples do you have for on-site power generation too? for example, solar glass rooftop wind turbines, as well as rooftop or green shell on site food production, many things. I think we saw some examples through the projects on that, but maybe if you guys have anything that you would like to share with Bernadette, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I have, Villoria has a project that we've been able to put a anaerobic digester in, so that the client, the developer, it's a big development in North Melbourne, which is obviously north of Melbourne. It's a mix of retail, resi, mixed use. And so, yeah, he is really excited about the idea of powering, 60% of the site with this anaerobic digester. Between retail and the residential, it can get about 2,000 tonnes of food waste a year. And, we need 10 to power it. Per day. And we need 10 to power it per the actual machine. And so it is about this, embedded network of getting the food waste and, celebrating it so people actually use it and don't put forks in and things like that. And so, yeah, I think there is a lot of optimism around and hype and marketing potential and, and the agency behind actually empowering people to feel like they have some control over the climate emergency, and by taking the food they can actually action things. And I think that very tangible example is something that I think that developers can engage with, and has to, in my opinion, has to come from the private sector. And it will come because they'll see the marketing, the buyback and the payback opportunities for an investment in these technologies. And so I think, we're super optimistic about the change. We just need, to allow regulatory functions to not stand in the way, is how we see it.
I'm just receiving a message, or we are receiving a message, that we are going to be cut off very soon. So I just wanted to at least be able to say thank you very much again for great presentations, really inspiring work, and I hope we can continue the conversation in the future. Thank you so much for being with us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.